Well, this was only a matter of time. Hello everyone, it's Niz. I had a couple of videos in mind before this one, but the Awesomeness Balance Discord I was in had a Raelynn week, and I went to town on that, and I decided I wanted to write down a script of my 2 cents, while it's still fresh in my mind. That being said, as of recording this, I've been working on that script for over a month. I really wanted to fully elaborate and show proper examples in this video. If it wasn't clear already, I'm going to give a warning ahead of time. It's going to be a more informative video. Probably going to be going over a bit of math and go over the issues of the character, but as well as some of my opinions on some upgrades and mechanics and some of the solutions I often hear that I don't think will work. So let's get started, I guess. Okay, cards on the table. As much as I like talking about Raelynn, doing this topic and trying to put my biases aside, I get this feeling that this will probably come back to haunt me in some patch in the future. But I'm going to do my best to put my personal preferences aside, or at the very least, do my best to make it abundantly clear when I'm talking about my personal preference when making a statement. Because every now and then I'm going to be talking through the lens of how I think Raelynn should be played rather than the most effective way to play Raelynn. Well, less of how she should be played and more of what I think is the fun way. But opinions and hopefully excuses aside, I'm going to do my best to talk about what's wrong with Raelynn. I'm going to try to go over Raelynn's more fundamental problems first. This section of the video will most likely be more timeless for obvious reasons. I also think this is worth going over before starting with the more topical things in this video. Plus, this will set the foundation for later subjects anyway, so let's get to it. The most common complaint about Raelynn has and always will be Time Rift. Time Rift is often seen as incredibly potent, effective at putting stops to pushes in general, and if not being incredibly effective in teamfights, at the very least having heavy presence. And let me tell you from all my experience, yeah, these are all true. Well, except with 3, it varies on team comp, map, and how well you place your rifts, but I digress. Raelynn with good placement can still make do. Time Rift on its own is still good at punishing stubborn or predictable opponents. An enemy entering Rift and being hit by CC will be locked into a death wall. A well-placed Rift can turn the tides of battle or make starting one not worth it. It's so potent because it's stationary in a pillar, one of its biggest weaknesses being once it's placed down, if a team fight moves away from it, it becomes completely irrelevant. But good Raelynn will place it in a spot that requires a lot of jumping to get out of the position, or her team might even make that spot an important one to fight in. One of the best examples is someone displacing an enemy onto the other side of Rift, and their only way out is to travel through it. Stuff like this is why I think nerfing Rift's duration rather than its cooldown is more effective in the long run. Cooldown nerfs will only become noticeable once they're heavy enough that she can't have them in between team fights or clearing waves, which doesn't actually fix the problem. The problem with nerfing the cooldown is that although it reduces the Rift's potential uptime, duration does the same thing but with more effects. Duration affects how long it can hold a choke point, duration affects how long it can hold down droids, and decreases the maximum damage Rift does. And for God's sakes, it'll make battery relevant. I'd like to repeat once again that duration is the best way to go when nerfing Time Rift, because I have heard talk about nerfing time slow. I get the feeling that there's a misunderstanding between how time slows and regular slows work, because I had this initially too, but let me go over the differences. The obvious ones is that regular slows actually slow down movement, while time slows make it so that everything a target does takes longer, such as self-stuns and jumping. Pretty obvious stuff, I know. This is why DPS is drastically dropped when you're in a time slow. Meanwhile, regular slows just affect your movement. This even goes as far as decreasing your jump height. It doesn't take a lot for a regular slowing percentage to slow down an opponent an effective amount. If you increase the slowing power by 10%, it would slow down the opponent 10 more percent. For time slows, 10% more slowing power might be 10% more slowing power, but time slows actually start out incredibly pathetic. That's why they're so high on base. The reason Yuri's is so low is because he has the most control over it. But time slows have a dramatic ramp up, so the higher the slowing power, the more effective a 10% increase is. There are 2 effects of Raelynn having the highest time slow in the game. Effect number 1 is that Retro Spaceship is really good. Effect number 2 is that any increase or reduction to her time slow would be incredibly dramatic. If Yuri, Max, and Raelynn suffered a 10% time slow nerf across the board, Raelynn would suffer the most, even though they got the same nerf. And it's math time. The calculation for time slows is 1 divided by the difference between 1 and x equals y. X being the time slow's percentage, y equals how much longer it takes to complete an animation under the time slow's effect. For this example, we're going to use Time Rift's time slow, which is a 65%. 1 minus 0.65 is 0.35. 1 divided by 0.35 is 2.85. It takes 2.85 times longer to do an action. So if an action were to say take a full second, it would take 2.85 seconds under this effect. Now let's see this under the effect of retro spaceship. Same math, except x is now 0.75, and 1 divided by 0.25 equals 4. From this 10% increase, your time slow is 40% more potent. I guess the thing worth pointing out here though is due to the ramp up that a 65% time slow losing 10% wouldn't affect it as much as a 65% time slow gaining 10%. My point being, even if it's reduced by 5%, it will still have some pretty drastic changes at this height. In short, I think that reducing duration will have more positive effects than reducing any of the other parts of base rift. Anyway, the next issue I'd like to cover with time rifts is the complaint that face rifting is far too easy for making a quick escape. That along with boots, which I'll get to later. I need a swear jar for the equivalent of me saying I'll get to that later. But first, I need to say something that's going to probably get me yelled at plenty. Face rifting has a skill ceiling to it.
Why you booing me? I'm right.
I think it's pretty obvious that I should probably elaborate on that one. Because the way I wrote it in the script initially, it reads like, well, to be fair, it takes a really high IQ to drop a time rift right in front of you. Obviously, not all face rifts are some daring, tactical, calculated strategy. In fact, more often than not, it's going to be, I don't like the looks of that, let me just put a rift between me and it and head for the door. But there are plenty of situations where face rifts are actually a shot to take full advantage of knowing the enemy's habits and self-stuns. For example, when a Vinny Spike dives as the supply poke, he'll typically dive right in front of you as to hit you at the end of the range while not getting any closer than he has to. That and dive is a dash, so he loses all momentum he gained before the dive. This makes it take a bit longer for Vayne to turn around after a dive. Oh, and bonus points if he uses Cloud right after dive because that's a self-stunning animation. You won't get this one as often anymore though, since they got rid of Silence Cloud. But stuff like this allows you to turn around and punish non-fatal, predictable dives. And if this is near turret, you can make it a bad trade even without sniping. Another good one is never face rifting a Penny at the start of a chase. Penny's pulse self-stun is particularly long. If you can get the turret without reaching the kill threshold of her maximum pulse, I recommend you doing so even though you probably were going to in the first place. Penny typically uses the pulse as a finisher, and if you can bait it out, you can lock her underneath turret. Any safe spot in general, really. Another good one is when you're pushing in bottom back turret in, well, just about any map. And they might have a lone star dropping through, and you have control of top, well, at least enough to where your droids are there, and you see them coming down. Dropping down and stunning them with your rift might not stop the bull, but it will catch them in a tight spot. It's all about anticipation. Honestly, it's one of the best defenses I think you can make to justify cooldown nerf, because whiffing a time rift becomes a lot more punishing. Does this justify the more practical usage of face rifting? Well, that's something you're gonna have to ask yourself. Because it still doesn't eliminate the problem of face rifting and just running away, all it brought up was a brief explanation of what would be lost in its removal, which are things I think are certainly valuable. I think I should clarify, I don't think anything with time rift needs to be nerfed, but if you're going to go after anything, slowing power is playing with fire. I honestly think it's best off to nerf duration. With that out of the way, I'm going to talk about upgrades, and since I've already been talking about it, I'm going to get the rest out of the way by starting with time rift. Most of the time rift's upgrades are pretty straightforward. Height went from the time rift's equivalent to Grit Lubricator, one stage being mandatory and second stage if you're feeling crazy, to sort of just being there now that base rift sort of has everything it needs. But it's still good with flying knots and floor fare, so it still has a place. Warhead is great for dealing with tankier enemies that move slower and have a larger hitbox, aka anything that has to go through rift longer than usual, as they suffer more from the DPS. And Retro Spaceship is the same in this regard, but it's also good in every situation. Due to how time slows work as mentioned earlier, that 10% increase is far more significant than it sounds. It's math time. Again, if the animation outside of Rift would take 1 second to complete, it'd take 2.85 seconds to complete inside of Rift. With Retro Spaceship, that 1 second becomes 4 seconds. 4 minus 2.85 equals 1.15. The self-stun would take 40% longer to complete. T-800 Dome's an odd one to say the least. It's considered incredibly niche by many, and many would be correct, but it's also got plenty of uses to allow it to be relevant. Well, by plenty, I mean 2 to 4. 4 if you ask me, and 2 if you ask pretty much everyone else. The main 2 being tanking for turret and body blocking. The other 2 options in my opinion, at least the ones that I can consider viable, would be blocking skill shots Seriously, people take this for granted. She should be dead and providing vision. As long as you hang on to your rift as an escape, you pretty much no longer have to pick between taking their critters for XP and health, or keep them there so you know exactly when they're collapsing. I might be overcompensating for the minimap stuff because I came from a time where they didn't even tell you which knot was on the minimap. 2 people would be missing and you see 1 dot approaching on the minimap and you'd just have to guess if it was Clunk or Raelynn. But having that much vision on the minimap is good for anticipating ganks and allows you to more effectively push out, which is really good because pushing the back turrets, especially bottom back turret for just about any map, is actually kind of dangerous if you're not snowballing hard and they have all their players up. Of course it depends on the comp and it's far from impossible, but it's easier to get the drop on you, no pun intended. There has been word to remove Humming's collision so it can't body block anymore, and I'm actually kind of fine with that, but I don't know, I kind of wish Raelynn's Humming would get some special properties, because Humming was nerfed time and time again, and removing Humming's collision makes one of its ideal positives just go down the drain. Can Humming get something else, please? I'm not too crazy about the idea of lowering the price a bit, but that's basically the only suggestion I have. I also think it'd be funny for Raelynn's Humming to have a higher damage but lower health than the average Humming, but that's mostly because I just love getting Humming kills. But at the same time, I'm tired of fighting this Raelynn.
Monster card! 3枚目モンスターカードドローモンスターカードドローモンスターカード
Base! Base!
モンスターカード
Base! Defeat. Well, you know, you can't win them all.
Oh, and I love HC Bomb, and duration is just irrelevant in most builds. You know, I'm getting the sneaking suspicion that duration doesn't matter as much for Raelynn as the first moments of placing Rift. Maybe cooldown was the right answer. In general, duration is the choice against team comps that don't have a dash, as you generally either have to make them wait or go through the Rift. I think it's mostly used to keep a push from being harassed, you know, if at all, but I think most Raelyns prefer to just hold on to it for key moments. And now we're on Snipes upgrades. This is actually a pretty simple one in comparison of the others. It's more or less fine the way it is, actually. Sure, there are a couple of obvious good picks, and some of the upgrades go in the category of, yeah, sure, I guess they're pretty useful in certain circumstances, but at the same time, man, you really don't need them. A pick that would also fall in that category if it wasn't so good all around, and an upgrade that pretty much dictates one build. 2 builds if you're feeling excessively courageous and are patient when it comes to results. So in general, I could only really dissect a couple of upgrades, starting with Flashy Glasses. Flashy Glasses is one of the most dependent upgrades in the game. Yes, even more dependent than Trick Up Your Sleeve. It's also an upgrade that you pretty much have to get last. In Sniper, that is. To give more context, Flashy Glasses increases Snipe's base damage, but decreases its range. You can buy the range upgrades to counteract this, but at this point you should just buy the damage versus Ocelots instead. It's cheaper, and its downside in comparison is pathetic when you think about it. That being, Flashy Glasses is cheaper, but actually it's not. Unless you're going Shotgun Snipe, you need the 2 range upgrades to counteract this. And this is actually more expensive than just buying Pump Rifle, and does more damage against enemy Ocelots. Flashy Glasses does a bit more damage to all other enemies, but for most instances, you're going to be aiming for enemy Ocelots. Snipe does reduced damage to droids, and mind you, it's not as reduced as Rift's damage, but Rift also slows down the droids and doesn't self-stun you. And if for some reason you want to deal with droids using Snipe, you're better off using Blind as it stuns them. And if for some reason you're absolutely determined to kill droids, I know this sounds facetious, but just shoot them. That burst of damage you do on both droids may look nice, but that's not counting for the delay that it takes to get into Snipe, the minimum time it takes to arm Snipe, and don't forget about the animation for Extinct Snipe mode. This is all time you could have just spent shooting them, and if you bought Pierce, you could easily out DPS Snipe. Destroying droids with Snipe's greatest defense is that you can hit them from a long distance. Said distance is decreased with Flashy Glasses, or you can just drop a Rift and be done with it. Even with the reduction, it does a great amount of damage to droids and effectively reduces their DPS, making them not a threat to anything they attack. Flashy Glasses are pretty much the least effective means of dealing with droids. Outside of max damage Snipes, the only other thing I could imagine it being used for is more effectively stealing Solar Boss. Just bear in mind, if any Raelynn buys anything other than these 2 bad boys, their chances of getting Flashy Glasses glasses takes a nosedive. I think one of the best things about flashy glasses though is even though it's a conditional upgrade, and a pretty dependent one at that, I ironically enough feel like I have plenty of freedom when I try to build it last. And I think that's because flashy glasses requires commitment but not sacrifice. Sure, you're best off getting range and damage before you get flashy glasses, but the thing is you're not giving up anything to build that. Most Raelyns would have gotten them anyway. At any point up to the 3rd upgrade, you can just think to yourself, yeah, no, I'm gonna get Iron Rifle instead. And you lose nothing in this except for the potential of buying that upgrade. Like, there are plenty of upgrades in Ocelot's that certainly aren't useless on their own, but heavily encourage you to get an upgrade that complements it. Like, a Sheep Bomb is great at dishing out bursts of damage after Time Rift, but if you got Pierce on that, you can clear out super fast. Or another idea, and the one I usually go with, build triple damage, or you could just build Rift to be more effective, I guess. My point being, these gimmicks, you usually build around them, while flashy glasses, you could just pick it up if you feel like it. To me, Iron Rifle is the true 3rd in the trinity of standard snipe upgrades. It'll block snipe cancel, it'll block dot, it might even keep you alive long enough to pull off a snipe. It is yet again time for math. In just about any situation, Pump Rifle is better than Iron Rifle, but Iron Rifle is the true superior when it comes to poking an enemy Raelynn with Snipe. When an enemy Raelynn goes into Snipe, the first thing you should do, well obviously is Rift her, but if that's not an option and you're in a safe place, you should Snipe her as well. Safe place being a location where an enemy will not punish you for sniping, and you're not in snipe kill threshold. If the enemy Raelynn has 2 stages of Pump Rifle and you have Iron Rifle and that's it, you'll still win. For half the solar, you can win trades even if they're ahead. She'll outdamage you if she has flashy glasses as well, but if you buy 1 stage of Pump Rifle, yeah, you still win. In both situations, you win the trade while spending half the solar, making Iron Rifle the superior pick when it comes to trading in mirror matches, or making yourself pass kill threshold for just a moment when you can't run away in time. The only way when you're using Iron Rifle for her to do more damage to you while using Pump Rifle is for her to be level 20 while you're level 1. And now it's time to talk about Blind, but when it comes to Blind, I've basically already covered all there is. It used to be good for spotting invisible enemies, but now it's basically just used to deal with droids. Mind you, it was a good decision considering it's less annoying than before when it could just stun droids for 3 seconds, but I honestly kinda wish they went with just having consistent aim on the opponent marking them with Blind. But the Blind show of Raelynn building max range and just swinging around her snipe was obnoxious to say the least, so I understand the change. I've talked about pretty much every upgrade that isn't incredibly bare bones, but there's one bare bones upgrade I do want to talk about, and that's cooldown. I want to talk about cooldown because I feel like it sets a bad precedent for snipe. I know you're thinking range already does that, and it does. Double range Raelynn sniping straight down lane happens all the time. And I think they're better off just reducing the distance penalty of flashy glasses to half of what it is now and just making range 1 stage. But I think cooldown goes under the radar. It might just be me, but I think cooldown for snipe works best for Raelyns who play it safe. Because generally for snipe, it's more about when's the right time to snipe than how often you can. This might just be me, but I feel like it's just more effective for Raelyns who just snipe behind turret. In short, I think snipe's fine the way it is. Flashy glasses could maybe use some tweaking and maybe even replaced with something else, something to finally justify making range 1 stage. But other than that, I think everything else is solid. But you know what? Despite me giving flack to snipe for lack of build order, it's not that bad compared to Proto Blaster. You could build this if you want to lay down some burst, you could build this if you want to focus on taking down turrets, you could build this if you want to do the max DPS possible against an enemy Ocelot, or other idea. You could just build this because it works for just about any situation demanded. Actually, you don't even need these two, just get Pierce and anything that's not range. And the reason you could do this is because at the end of the day, they're all damage. More damage, more damage, more damage, more damage, deal damage to everyone. And the one upgrade that doesn't deal damage is the Redheaded Stepchild. Not because it's bad, but there is a lot of reasons to not get this upgrade, I'll go into that later. But because it's completely unnecessary. And I have nothing wrong with simple upgrades, but look at these upgrades compared to Snipe. We have more damage, have Snipe available more often, be able to blind on hit, yet more damage but at the cost of range, a flat shield, and range. Of course, it's easier to get creative with ability upgrades than it is with basic attack, but 4 damage upgrades in a row of 6 sounds ridiculous on paper. I defend this though because it's the same problem Leon has. Leon has 4 damage upgrades, but they apply to different situations. Leon can have a lot of builds that are 3 damage upgrades, but they'll have completely different targets. Max not DPS is better against Clunk. Triple damage and HC Bomb can shred through squishies. but max general DPS is great against sieging turrets. But then I tested it out, and I discovered in comparing the raw DPS between 2 damage upgrades and a Pierce, that I went to the back bomb turret of AI Station 205. And in comparing the differences between the times to destroy the turret, it's a 2-second difference. This is at level 20 with no droids helping. Speaking of droids, with Pierce you can still quickly and effectively deal with droids, while the DPS build would have to waste time on droids or drop a rift. With the Pierce build, you don't have to pick between losing time in droids or burning a time rift. When it comes to structured DPS, sure it takes it out faster, but it's not nearly as practical. And not to mention the difference is only 2 seconds for dealing with the turret at full health. Honestly, that's far from substantial. When it comes to picking up stuff, you're better off just getting Pierce and waiting for levels to kick in, because you scale, turrets don't. Then I decided to go the not shredding build, and compare it with my personal favorite triple damage build, because the attack speeds better at taking out more resilient enemies, while triple damage is great at HC burst. These two builds, although similar, are meant for completely different targets, and I really wanted to hammer home the difference between these two builds, so I had them both against the Clunk, and the difference was one shot, less than half a second. Mind you, this Clunk didn't have the upgrades that made him more tanky, but this is still a level 20 Clunk. Most Knots can't get around his base health if they tried, and yet the difference between these two builds is one shot. I did the math and the difference between this DPS is 34, which is slightly more than one stage of Skull Bracelet, which sounds like a noticeable difference, but the results... ugh. And the difference for HC Bomb triple damage is 77. But all this goes to show the actual problem I think Raelynn's build has. Leon has 4 damage upgrades, but Leon's upgrades all have a different purpose. His damage upgrade is the standard one that works for anything. His attack speed may be yet more DPS, but it synergizes with Clover of Honor. Backstab damage is great for chasing runners, plus it being a good chase upgrade allows it to synergize pretty well with slowing power, and Clover of Honor rewards consistent hitting. Meanwhile with Raelynn, you get 2 damage upgrades and a Pierce. Which damage upgrades? Whichever you feel like. They all do the same thing to the same targets. The only one that's different is Cat Air Freshener if you're feeling a bit cheeky. These builds lack any strengths or weaknesses compared to each other. I don't mind 4 damage upgrades, but what I do mind is right now all we have is a huge pile of redundancy. So the real question is, how does this get fixed? The simple answer is that a damage upgrade should be replaced. A completely different upgrade that has synergy with some other upgrades would leave room for completely different builds, while there will be 3 damage upgrades allowing those who still want to build pure damage to do so. This actually turns out to be a lot more difficult than you'd think initially, at least to me. Because due to Raelynn's kit, it's really hard to come up with a reasonable upgrade to replace damage. Since she has Rift, any movement related CC upgrades would work dangerously well with it, and even if it wasn't movement related, it'd probably have to be limited to one target.
This is probably fine. This is no longer fine.
And even if it was on the first person hit, something like a weaken is less than ideal to put on a ranged Knot. You can't give her sustain. One of her weaknesses is that she completely lacks any means of sustaining herself outside of her utility row. Anything that empowers a shot after Raelynn snipes and hits an opponent will be more or less pointless, because anyone she's sniping will be knocked back out of range or dead. I highly discourage anything that empowers droids because, as I said before, and I will say again, droids are unreliable. Any upgrade that allows droids to become stronger will only really be reliable for pushing turret, and at that point I just buy damage. So few possibilities remain, and most of them are gimmick damage upgrades, which actually some of the ideas are kinda cool. But then we end up with suggestions like the one where your cooldown on snipe is sped up by a percentage for a short period of time after hitting an enemy Knot. Huh. I bring this up again because this really encompasses the main issue with a lot of Raelynn's damage upgrade ideas. Or, well, ideas to replace it. They're often incredibly niche, needlessly complicated, and are often completely overshadowed by an upgrade that may admittedly give you lesser results but provide them reliably. A few of them also end up only being helpful to Raelyns that stand behind turret and hit the enemy. Behind turret's one of the #1 places you'd snipe someone who's in Protoblaster range. And the damage based on range is pretty great and all, but more likely end up synergizing better with Pierce, because droids are one of the easiest things you can control distance on. And when your bullet does more damage the further it goes, it's great for it to not stop at the first enemy. I honestly think unless it's a CC related damage upgrade, especially if it's an upgrade like damage based off of range, I think it really needs to hit that sweet spot where it does just a little more damage at the end of its range than a regular damage upgrade. So it'd be worth getting Pierce along with it, but it'd be worth getting on its own if you can position yourself well, while willing to sacrifice that you may miss out on a lot of damage if the enemy closes the gap on you. This will make it an upgrade that genuinely works well with range, but you don't need to buy range just for it to function. The mentality being that if you really want to get in on that full range damage, you better not get Pierce along with it, but if you just want to have free reign over your bullets but deal more damage based off of range, you can just get Pierce. Or don't risk it at all and go non-gimmick damage. The big issue being that it would still be a difficult case to justify this over Pierce. Most Raelyns would probably just pick this up, go the maximum range behind turret, and hit droids with the end of their Pierce. So instead of being ideal against team comps that you can control the range of, this would probably just be used to further harass behind turret. There's another idea I absolutely enjoy on Raelynn, and I have no clue why it isn't in her kit already, and that's dealing more damage on consecutive hits versus Astronauts, which, you know, rewards good accuracy and is thematically appropriate and adds more variety to her build, especially when you consider attack speed would ramp up the DPS far faster and lead it to becoming much more. I think for this to function well though, it's going to have some limitations, such as any of the following will reset the damage. Missing an attack, your duration runs out, or you hit a non-knot target. Oh, and each shot is limited to raising the damage by 1 stack. These things make it so it rewards high consistent accuracy when facing an opponent. It makes it so that you can't hold on to stacks from hitting enemies before or for hitting droids, which I'm going to express as integral to this idea, because the whole point of this upgrade is that it ramps up in fights so that you build up more DPS in longer battles, while also assuming you can remain consistent and keep hitting the opponent. I'm not setting a damage into stone just yet, this is definitely something that would have to be tested out in the beta, but I'd also recommend doing something to make sure the stacks come after HC Bomb. This is meant for the DPS build, so for it to deal a bunch of damage after getting max stacks and dropping a time risk would be kinda scary. I also think it shouldn't have the best of both worlds, but short, sweet, makes sense, and has a clear type of enemy it's meant for. Oh, and the reset on hitting a non-knot as well as only having a maximum of 1 stack per bullet were both countermeasures to make sure it doesn't go super well with Pierce. I don't think those are necessary for this upgrade to work. Okay, cards on the table, I'm just tired of everything working so well with Pierce. And these ideas don't make it incompatible with Pierce, but make it harder to work with Pierce if you're focusing on combat against enemy knots. This will probably reduce the variety of its builds, but I really don't want an upgrade like this to have a whole lot of luxuries. Please Brahmo, I swear if you start putting this stuff in the betas, I'll actually test them out. I swear we won't have another Commander Rocket incident. Probably. And I know an idea like this is definitely in your power. Mostly because Deadlift already has it. I'm not angry. Alright, even though the last ideas of that upgrade were to actively encourage ignoring Pierce, in a video called Talking About Raelynn, I'm definitely going to be talking about one of her biggest problems. Ever since the change that her abilities do less damage to droids, her Pierce went from okay to pretty much essential. But here's the problem for me. Raelynn's base DPS is solid, and her range is just below average for a ranged knot, which is still certainly enough for you to ignore range in just about every match. But how come she gets an upgrade that allows her bullets to pierce indefinitely, and it's tied for second cheapest upgrade in that row? 150 solar and you can shoot through as many targets as you want. And if you've ever fought a Raelynn on Serona when you're all melee, you know how bad that gets. So yeah, infinite piercing for something with this solid of a range and for this little solar, that's ridiculous. On the other end of the coin, allow me to take this conversation from an upgrade you would rationally always get to an upgrade you would never get reasonably. That's right, it's time to talk about Monkey Hand. I'd like to start by saying it got promoted. It went from absolutely useless in my eyes to gigawatt battery status, which is the not inherently a bad upgrade, but the base stats are good enough as is and requires for you to sacrifice a considerably better option to pick it up status.
Victory!
I have had a couple matches where I actually picked up Monkey Hand, and bear in mind this is because I didn't get Pierce, because I didn't want to give up a second damage upgrade. And to its credit, I found it useful against Rocket, because it was pretty much impossible to trade with Rocket otherwise. But if I wanted to effectively poke him, I probably should have just built Snipe. And don't get me wrong, there's something incredibly satisfying with finishing off an opponent with a shot at the end of your upgraded range, but that's little comfort for how pathetic this upgrade actually is. Alright, bonus round, time to tear Monkey Hand apart. This upgrade was clearly a placeholder until something better was thought up to replace its older version. Most knots outrange her before buying Monkey Hand, still outrange her. Any knot that won't still outrange her but still has a range upgrade, with the exception of Commander Rocket and just barely, may I add, will still outrange her if they buy the range upgrade. Gunpenny outranges you, and so does Vinny with his range upgrade, and you outrange them both to begin with. Their weakness is that your bullet has far better travel time, and you can't kite these two because they both have means of closing the distance immediately. Most other range upgrades are cheaper and or provide more range. Oh, and seriously, what's the argument here for having range cost more than Pierce? It'll already lose any competition for the upgrade in your build that isn't a damage upgrade. Why discourage buying it even further? So I discovered one use for it, but it's so niche that it's still completely outmatched in pretty much every situation by triple damage or 2 damage and a pierce. Even if pierce was nerfed and they changed all the damage upgrades, this would still be a hard sell, which is why I think it either needs an upgrade that actually synergizes with it, or it needs to finally get replaced. And this is coming from the guy who wholeheartedly believes that humming is great outside of body blocking. Seriously, just look at it.
From where you're kneeling must seem like an 18-carat run of bad luck. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
Enemy team successful.
Now I know I've been talking for a while, but there's one last thing I want to go over, so bear with me here. The last thing to go over is her utility row. Now this one's gonna be short, and I really mean it this time. The only thing I really want to talk about is her boots. Raylynn's boots, well, Denny's boots, are kind of notorious for giving her a lot of escape. I think that out of combat movement speed is really important to allow her to get in and out of positions for sniping. And I don't have any really big proposed changes for it, but there is one thing that's always bothered me. To understand this, I'm going to go over the context of out of combat for Raylynn's boots. For Raelynn, out of combat means not using an ability. So shooting, sniping, and putting down a time rift. And I'm fine with this. But the only thing I don't understand is why the out of combat timer starts at arming snipe. This means when snipe ends, she can sprint away. These boots are really good, so good that I instinctually get them at the start of every match. Yet even I'm not rational enough to give up these bad boys. But I feel like boots removes some of the sense of vulnerability you should have when you snipe. With these boots out of combat effect, you can outrun just about any assassin who doesn't commit to movement speed or use an ability to chase you down. And that's the way I think it should be. But, as much as I don't want to discourage risky sniping because it's fun, if you're caught out, you should be properly punished for it. But if the enemy team doesn't have enough CC or the speed, you can just run past them. So here's my proposal. Once you exit snipe mode, that's when the out of combat timer starts. This way, after snipe, there's an open window for the enemy to respond. If you miss snipe on a target that's in kill threshold and they respond aggressively, they can punish you. When you land a snipe, you stop all acceleration of the opponent. That should be your opening, your head start, so to speak. I know this might encourage more the gameplay of snipe, drop rift, and speed off, but I think it's worth it in the sense that strategy will be less likely successful, and it adds more tension to a snipe other than not hitting the opponent. It also further encourages countering snipe because it's not only contesting her burst and closing the distance, it leaves this opening where she can't immediately get away after being countered, making boots less of a get out of jail free card and more of a timer for an assassin to pick you off. And this would really help with encouraging players to consider other options than just running away immediately after a snipe. And Raelynn's that are caught out are less likely to immediately slip through. I think it's just a healthy change overall. With that taken care of, I think that concludes my video of talking about Raelynn, her fundamental issues, and a few issues with her upgrades. I hope you all enjoyed my video. It took a little longer than I expected, but I managed to get it out, and fingers crossed I made no significant mistakes in the math. I hope you all enjoyed the video and have a great day. Farewell.